Sorry about this. I think we are live. How are you, Andre?
I'm great, thanks, Peter. Yeah.
Good to have you here. I just apologise for 1 second. There's a couple of buttons here that didn't press properly, and I'm just checking they're working. That's good. That one is. I normally have a 5-minute kind of music count in, so I can do all this behind the scenes. But I thought I'd be smart. I thought I'd be smart today and get it all happening straight away with no problems. But that didn't happen. But I think we're on Facebook. If someone could send me a message and let me know, that would be great. So, sorry. Sorry about this. Okay, let's officially start. Hello and welcome to SDAQ&A, episode number 27 of season 3. And Happy New Year, everyone. 2022. My very special guest today is Andre Afamasaga. Good to have you here today, Andre.
Great to be here, Peter. Thanks so much for inviting me on the show. Yeah.
Oh, look, it's a real honour to have you on the program. And we've been kind of chatting a little bit informally behind the scenes to pull it off. And finally, here we are.
Yeah.
And so it's really good to have you here. Welcome, everyone that's watching. Maybe some of my helpful admin guys could just shoot me a little message. Just want to double check that I am actually live on all the platforms there. I'm not sure if you can see your end there at all, Andre, but I think we are.
Yeah, it looks like you are, I think.
Oh, that's good. That's
Yeah,
great.
there's a couple of messages coming in to say that.
Oh, terrific. Oh, there we go. There is that other little button. Oh, good. So, yes, here we are. We've had a few weeks break here at SDAQ&A and very much looking forward to the year ahead. Got some new software, as you guys can see, which I did get just before Christmas, but I'm now just reminding myself which buttons to press. But it's great fun, and I'm really enjoying it. So we've been having some interesting conversations just recently, Andre, into the LGBTQIA plus community, and I think you've got a really interesting story to share. I first kind of heard about you. Was it a newspaper article that you wrote in, or was about you?
Yeah.
And
Nice.
then
Yeah.
and then also on the Aussie show, is it called Insight?
Yeah.
And that was fascinating. I watched that show with great interest and really appreciated how you articulated your story. And we'll kind of share a bit of that today. And also, I listened to you on Burn the Haystack podcast as well. And that'd be about a year ago now, I guess, wouldn't it? But that one. So, look, before we kind of kick off, tell us a little bit about your early life. Who is Andre Afamasaga and where were you from originally? And tell us about what it was like being a little boy growing up.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Samoan, born and raised in New Zealand in Lower Hutt. I'm a third generation Adventist. My grandma's family in Samoa, she's part of the Caressa family, was one of the first prominent Samoan families to come to Seventh-day Adventism. So they converted from Catholicism. And that was a bit of a real coup. In fact, my great uncle, my grandma's brother, wrote the Samoan national anthem and a lot of the Adventist hymn book. So fair to say, Adventism, kind of steeped in it. And so growing up as a Samoan in Lower Hutt, it was really hard to tell where Adventism finished, where Christianity finished, and when being Samoan and culturally finished. They all just sort of morphed into one. But all of those different forces, I suppose, being Samoan, being Christian, being Adventist, I suppose all of those gave me a clue really early on in terms of what was acceptable in terms of behaviour. All types of behaviour. I've been very sort of image conscious, and what I mean by that is been really fearful about what people might say or think about us because of our behaviour.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
You. Sorry to interrupt, but when I grew up, we kind of moved around a lot, and I never really felt part of any particular culture.
Mm,
I lived in New Zealand a bit, lived in New Guinea, Fiji, Australia, and it was hard when I was younger. But as I've been older, I realised I didn't have to bend to any kind of cultural mores or norms,
mm,
and a lot of the the ways that culture keeps you within and doing what you're supposed to do, I just didn't get. But
yeah.
you've got you would have had a strong sort of culture from your Samoan background, a strong culture from the Adventism. Um, di- what kind of um, pressure did you feel just to kind of be within that culture when you knew that there was other things going on that were kind of making you a bit separate to both cultures?
Oh yeah, full on. I mean, on top of that as well, coming from New Zealand, I don't mean to generalize, but really well known for All Blacks and rugby culture, and there is a real sort of stereotype or archetype in terms of what masculinity is. And so everyone's trying to avoid being teased for being different. So obviously, like most gay people or rainbow people or non-straight heterosexual people, you kind of know early on what you are, but there's that conflict and the tension, the dynamic in terms of accepting yourself or and therefore pay the price in terms of being different and labeled different. Yeah. So I think all of those things I was forever just putting in the background, putting my identity on hold, etc. Yeah.
Because I guess where I was going with that is that people have, if you're being, if there's cultural norms you have to adhere to, that's hard enough anyway.
Oh yeah.
So to have these other feelings, and people I've interviewed that have talked
Yeah.
about this have shared the same experience, whereas
Yeah.
as a young person, they knew something was going on that was a bit different.
Yeah.
Can you unpack a little bit about that feeling different
Yeah.
kind of component
Yeah.
when you were young?
Yeah. When I was young, probably just knowing that um, I think a lot of our culture in both of our countries, in Australia and New Zealand, but across the world, often a sort of a criticism or a teasing is, to call someone gay. So I think you always know from a young age if that's you, and then trying to avoid that. There's a stigma, I suppose, that's
Okay,
associated with being different and then also being gay as well. Yeah, and I think then add to that the dynamic of not only being a Samoan but a migrant in New Zealand as well.
right.
And I mean, there's just all these things where you're not
Yeah.
wanting to stick out to fit in with the norm. And so there's an immense pressure that I think like adolescents, young people face in general, in terms of trying
Yeah.
to fit in. But I think, when you add the sexuality component to it, that makes it harder. And then when you add the layer of religion, because we're always trying to please God and please others and prove our Christianity and our worth and our, religion and our ability to uphold that, you know,
And would you say that
yeah.
when you were growing up, you became aware that the Adventist religion wasn't so, and Christianity in general wasn't so supportive of someone with that
Sort
felt
of, but not
different,
so much
or
because I grew up in a Samoan church, and so sex was taboo. It was off for everyone, So
every kind of sexuality was off the
yeah,
table? Yeah. Yeah.
which
Okay.
is quite good actually, because in our culture, like there's certain topics that sort of aren't really discussed.
Yeah.
So I think that was kind of helpful because in our church growing up, we didn't really hear a lot of homophobic messages per se because they just wouldn't talk about sex
About
as if it
anything,
didn't
right?
exist. So in that kind of way, it was kind of a bit of a safety guard. Not so much now, I don't think, simply because Christianity does seem to get defined by all the things we don't stand for. So I think homosexuality, for instance, and people's stance on that is I think all cultures talk about that now, but
Yeah.
not for me growing
Totally.
up. Yeah.
One of the things I've noticed in doing this kind of component of the series where I've been chatting to LGBTQIA plus people, the community, is the confusion that young people feel and the lack of support that they have in kind of coming out. And do you think that things have changed now so say if there's a young person between the age of 8 and 16, they're going through the same kind of feelings that you were going through between that age group. Do you think they have people they can turn to now it's a little bit more front and center? And B, share us your experience when you felt like you needed to reach out, but maybe you couldn't.
Yeah. So there's just a message here to say that the volume's a bit low, Peter. So I don't know if you want to turn it up.
I wonder if it's mine or both.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Thanks, Gwen, for letting us know that. Just let me know if it's my volume or both. Thank you. I'll crank them both up a little bit.
Okay, I'll keep talking. So I think it's definitely better now. It's still not easier. I think, and I think it was really important for me to share my story. One of the reasons it was important for me to share my story is because I wanted to show that visibility, not me, not like highlighting, profiling Andre, but rather providing another terms of reference, I suppose, for people, I think one of my biggest regrets was when I was a pastor is that I would preach, and I was really fortunate to preach all around Australia and around New Zealand. So I did big camps, etc. Did a lot of week of prayers, and young people would always come up to me afterward, or people in general would just talk about how the talks had touched their lives. But I always knew when it was a rainbow young person in the closet, and we would never have to say this, but they would always come up and they would always say, I feel like I relate to you in so many ways. Like it's so awesome seeing you up there. And we both knew what we were talking about. And all I would just say is I'll just give them a nice, firm praying for you. God has got you.
Yeah.
Because
you were kind of reading between the lines with each other with nothing really being said.
Totally. And of course, that time I was closeted myself. And I thought God's will for me was to remain that way, or to remain celibate, or to remain, not ever accept my homosexual identity. So when I said I was praying for them, I was praying for them not to change their sexuality, but to sort of be able to accept that if they wanted to stay in the church, that they would have to, that this is the life that they would have to live. Of course, now having come out myself and having tried to become straight and thinking that God wouldn't love me and people wouldn't accept me for, just being gay, I would have a very different conversation with those young children, those young people, rather. I would say to them that, hey, God is much bigger than the church. God is even bigger than our religion. God is bigger than what people think of you, and he really loves you, and you have maintain a relationship with him independent of the church, and if you find belonging and social acceptance in the church, then cool. But that's a bonus. God's got your back. Yeah.
Right. So during that era where you're kind of let's go back a little bit to when you're between 8 and 16. Were there people like yourself that you felt like, I know that person's part of the gay community, but is obviously keeping it quiet, but maybe I can connect with them? And how different is that to now, do you think, for the young 18 to 16-year-old?
Yeah, no, there were no such examples when I was growing up. Even if there were people, no one sort of even inferred, implied, And to be honest, the ones that I did know of when I became a bit older and read about, I literally, probably in the same way that some people look at me, I thought they were devilish. I thought that they had lost their mind, and I thought that, these terrible things that people say, that you cannot have both a faith and you cannot, claim a sexual orientation that's not straight. So even if they did exist, I probably wouldn't have taken them seriously.
And
my gosh,
what was that?
was the fire alarm or the smoke alarm. Sorry, it's just went once.
If your house starts burning down, I want you to show your commitment and stay with the interview.
I know. You won't be able to tolerate the noise. Yeah.
So, what I'm trying to work out is if this culture of LGBTQ plus within Adventism is changing. So we go from your experience as an 18 to 16-year-old, where it's like no man's land. You can't really tell if other people are like you or not. And then you go through a period perhaps where you were in the ministry and you kind of knew yourself a bit and you were able to reach out to people in a kind of knowing way. And I'm trying to work out if currently, and I think maybe the answer is yes, currently there are more ways that the young people, 8 to 16, for example, may be able to, like they might be able to contact kinship, or I'm trying to work out, is it more public now within the Adventist Church for there be to support for young gay and LGBTQ plus
definitely
people?
think so. I mean,
Right.
when you look around at, there's lots of us now sharing our stories. It's myself. I think you've had on your show, Joe and Dan and others. There's a number of us that are sharing our stories now, and that can only be helpful. To give someone who's grown up in the church and who loves, loves God, even loves being Adventist. But knows of their sexuality,
Right.
it provides options for them, and I think that's a really cool, healthy, awesome thing. Yeah.
Great. So I guess the fact that people are talking about it more has a secondary benefit that it just becomes more
Absolutely.
normal, more normalized,
Yeah,
I guess. Yeah.
that's right. So the church has had to continue to evolve its response to people coming out. I think for a long time, it was like, you can't be gay, that's sinful. Then it sort of went on to, well, you can be gay, but don't practice.
Yeah.
And then, that whole hate the sin, love the sinner. So the message has continued to evolve, and I think as more people not only share their stories, but I think as people are educated more and understand the situation, like in terms of sexuality isn't something that you choose. It's not you just wanting to be naughty or wanting not to be obedient to God. I think when people start to understand this complex but also very straightforward issue, I think the church will continue to evolve, have to evolve their response. So one of the things I refer to often is there was a piece of research in 2017 and 2018 in Australia and in New Zealand, and it was actually by McCrindle, the research group. So it was actually commissioned by Christians. But what they did is looked at, in Australia and in New Zealand, what are the top blockers or barriers that would stop someone from coming to a Christian church. And the top blocker was the church's stance on homosexuality. So in both countries, up to 40% of people who said they would absolutely be willing to join the church wouldn't join because of the church's stance. The second blocker from that was actually the church's teaching on hell. So I think when Israel Folau did what he did like a couple of years ago and said that all gays are going to hell, it was kind of a double whammy.
Yeah.
And you kind of lose a whole group of people that would be open to church, but not because of the beliefs. So my feeling is, in the same way we've had to evolve our response in terms of family violence, even gender situation, that in my view, it's just a matter of time before we have to review and look at the way that we've talked about the gay community and allowing them into the church or not.
Yeah, boy, that's interesting. The hell and the acceptance of gay community as being a plus if people are not doing the fire and brimstone kind of approach, and if they're accepting of the gay community, that makes the whole that particular church more inviting.
Yeah.
What's Sorry, go ahead.
And I think I know many Christians would now say that's a compromise. It's actually not a compromise. It's just because the world or non-religious people just know that you can't change your sexuality. It's a no-brainer for them. So for them, it's not a compromise at all. It's just actually common sense.
Yeah.
So, because I know some people would be listening to this now and saying, oh, the church is compromising, and we would never, in order for us to have more people come through the door, we're compromising. It's actually not. It's just actually having a scientific health evidence base, and one that is morally and ethically responsible as well.
And sadly, the church is often behind by 20 to 50 years with some of the progress in these understandings. And I've noticed that the millennial generation and younger are wanting things to happen way quicker. And whereas my generation plus were like, it's okay, things will happen, no worries, another 50 years, no problems. In God's time kind of thing, whereas they're chafing at the bit to go, no, if we're going to church, we want it to be the kind of church right now that we want to be a part of.
Totally.
Yeah. Which I think is a good thing.
I think it's a good thing. I think, my generation and beyond, I think, there's so much accommodation of stuff. There's a lot of sweeping under the carpet of stuff. There's a lot of, we call it nuance and balancing of stuff. But I think new generations are just like, it's not that some may think that they don't understand, but actually I think they're just like, they just can't reconcile how you can do that, in some ways, it's a bit more honest in my view,
Yeah. I think the millennial and under really identify and align with authenticity. They can cope. They can cope with flawed individuals and flawed systems, but they want their leaders to be authentic.
Absolutely. And authentic doesn't mean perfect. That's the other interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah. I look at the value Genesis research, the Adventist one that we well know of, in the States. And just for decades, Adventist young people have left the church, and that trend has not ever reversed. And one of the key findings of that research going back to the 90s, perhaps 80s, was that because Adventist young people saw that what their parents said publicly and in the church was not reflected at home.
Yes.
But for me, when I hear that, that's less a slight on parents, but rather that I think what we say publicly and what we do in our churches actually is not reflective or realistic, actually.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just a quick comment on there's a few comments about the volume, and there's a kind of bit of static. I think we've fixed the volume. Those that are watching, perhaps let me know. Sorry for these back in the saddle, little technical problems. The static issue, though, is that'll be depending on the number of people on Wi-Fi at the moment. And I have a little meter I can see going up and down, which when it goes into the orange, I know there'll be a bit of static. So we just have to push through that. But I think we've fixed the volume, and I do apologise for the occasional static chirpy sound. Just on what you were saying there, and this is what's really interested me. I know for a fact that a lot of conference pastors, union pastors, division pastors, and employees behind the scenes are very supportive of women's ordination, very supportive of the gay community. Some of them may not agree with some aspects of the gay community. They might still be the jury may still be out for them as far as some of the clobber texts and what they really mean, but they're open to being supportive and allies to the community. But none of them will come out publicly and say that. And I think personally, in my humble opinion, that's a real sad thing, because what people, I think, are wanting is their leaders to be this authentic kind of have this authenticity about them. And so on the one hand, they're getting phone calls behind the scenes saying, hey, we support you and good on you, and it's great that the conversation is happening. But in reality, the conversation isn't happening if they're not willing to be public about it on social media and on the platform of where they speak. Am I being overly critical of them with that? And I'm not saying you think this at all. I'm just saying, in my opinion, I would love to see leaders being able to speak what their truth freely, but to also say, hey, this is just my personal opinion. The church may not think this right now, but just I want to know that you guys, I publicly support you.
Yeah. So I agree with everything you were saying. You've just said there. I have said this in other places, but simply it comes down to our church members. The constituents won't allow that. So there is no safe place for leaders to be vocal and public and affirming and supportive of this.
Mm. And I don't want to
So
come across that I'm attacking them. I feel sorry for the situation they're in.
totally,
I'm
absolutely,
not attacking them, and it's not for all of them. They don't all have to speak up. But I just think it's sad that not even one person
yeah,
that's in a pastoral
yeah,
care position will speak up.
absolutely. So, and listen, my heart goes out to all of them and so many people that I love and respect and have been so supportive of me in my current situation and before then, so I'm not attacking either. But I would say this is that the current model won't allow them to. We belong to a worldwide church, you have to come in line with what that is. But our church members won't allow. Sometimes, in my view, and I'm going to sound I don't hope I sound disparaging, but sometimes the view of sort of some of the loudest and the noisiest people, even if it's not the most common view, is the one that most people are scared of. The irony to me is that some of these same people reject this idea of called cancel culture. I don't know if you've heard about cancel culture,
Yes, yeah,
but
yeah,
cancel culture is often when someone has been known to do something, particularly in the past, and then they get cancelled. But to be honest, our church and Christians and those who are not supportive of rainbow people are some of the biggest cancel people.
yeah,
It is not safe for anyone in a church admin position to speak up, and that's sad because our constituents won't allow it. Change always comes from the bottom up. I don't know. I don't think Adventism supports that bottom up approach because we're
yeah,
so top down.
yeah.
So yeah,
And in some ways, that means that leaders who have the private conversation with someone from the LGBTQ community, supporting them, they're offering them false hope. If the church, from its very structural model, is not going to bring about that kind of change because at its grassroots it doesn't want that change, why offer people false hope? And what's the alternative? What is the hope?
yeah. Gosh, I may sound cynical now. And although I'm no longer a pastor, I still go to my Adventist church if I'm not traveling. I'm there every week. I really love my community, my local church. So I feel culturally, in many ways, Adventist. Believe I'm a follower of God, but Adventist. But that's all to say that that I don't hold out any hope in terms of the church ever changing. So while there's many parts of me culturally that identify as an Adventist, the church in my lifetime is never going to change their stance towards homosexuality. So that means that I think those of us who still choose to stay in the church and have our sexual orientation as well and not be ashamed, embarrassed of that is just our kind of lot. And I think you've just got to accept that your salvation doesn't come from the church. It doesn't come from church members. It doesn't come from pastors at all. Yeah.
That's
And
great. I think that's a very mature and wise way to look at it.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think people who want that change, and can I just say this? I'm not what I'm saying now about the gay rainbow situation. I don't think of it in the same way in terms of women's ordination. So I don't think that if you're a woman or a woman pastor and you want to see women's ordination, that you should just put up with that. I'm not saying that at all. I
No,
think
no, it's different.
yeah, it's a different case.
Yeah.
I think because the change for rainbow people is so way off that you just need to be really careful if you want to get into that type of advocacy and push. Because I'll just say to you, good luck. You're probably fighting a battle that's not going to change. So
Yeah, look, I love hearing that because that doesn't depress me. That
yeah,
makes me feel like someone's facing this head on with reality glasses fully intact. And I think that then gives people hope in a different way to find the really great little churches here and there. I know in my area in Kurrambong, there's a couple of really great churches that accept the rainbow community. And I love what's happening there with Floyd and kinship, where it's almost like a separate movement. You can go and join that, and they have conferences and online church programs and all sorts of things. So
Yeah.
there's ways you can be involved instead of banging your head against the wall expecting a change to happen.
Yeah. I think the other thing is, for those of us who are rainbow people and, feel marginalized and slighted by society and then also by our church, it's also just about preserving your own sanity and your own resilience as well. So I'm just like, there's other places to apply your energy. And in my view, this is not one of those places. You can educate people, you can be around and, sort of support people, but, just look after yourself. Peter, I've got some sort of, not roadworks, but some sort of construction going on in the background. I'm just going to close the door behind me if you don't mind.
Sure,
Just going to
that's
pop.
fine. You do that. That's not a problem at all. And just those that are watching, I'm hoping that the staticky sound is at a minimum, and that you're enjoying the program. It's really great to have with us today Andre Afamasaga. Andre, as I chat with you, I'm very aware of what a great pastor you would be, and someone with a really great what's the word? A great understanding and a sense and a passion for pastoral care. Can we go back a little bit and share with us, what your call to ministry was and how you felt about it, and some of the things that you found that you enjoyed doing it, and then lead us to the process of how that kind of you just mentioned that you're no longer an Adventist pastor, and that kind of saddened me to hear that. But just take us on that journey of your call to ministry, some of your positive experiences, and then what led to the kind of the point where you were no longer able to be an Adventist pastor.
Yeah. I think growing up Adventist, I always use the story, and people, Adventists, it doesn't matter where I preach, they laugh about this. But when I grew up, my sister and I, Sabbath mornings was the most chaotic and stressful time in our family. Mum and dad will be busy cooking, getting ready for Sabbath, and because we're Samoans, we spent literally the whole day at church. But it meant that when we were trying to get out the door, it was very stressful. And for some reason, on the way to church, Mum and Dad would be arguing with each other. And it was like clockwork. When they'd stop arguing with each other, they'd turn around on my sister and I in the back seat. And then they would turn around and go, "And you, look at you." Like, what? Anyway, this literally went on for years. We always knew that when we got to a certain juncture, a certain point on route, that they would then turn on both of us. Anyway, shortly after that, would arrive at church, and like clockwork, I'm not even joking, the front doors would open, and Mum and Dad would jump out of the car, and they'd say, "Happy Sabbath," and to their friends, and laughs and everything. And my sister and I would get out of the car, and we would literally, both our eyes were puffy from crying or just
Yeah,
really annoyed.
the stress of the
Anyway,
morning.
oh, totally. So, and it's just the irony of, our catchline, "Happy Sabbath," because it did not feel like that. Years later, I grew to appreciate the Sabbath and going to church, etc. But anyway, suffice to say that when I eventually became a pastor, even when I was a youth leader, I always knew that that type of, and I'm not dissing my parents, but that type of inauthenticity, that mask wearing, was just not something that I wanted to be a part of,
Yeah.
So I think, and probably to my detriment, when I look back now, my early days of ministry, I was way too transparent. Like, I was, some of the stuff that I admitted to doing, I was like, oh my gosh, what, like, you want people to respect you a little bit. But I think because I had so grown up with the mask wearing, that I probably jumped way to the other end in terms of being more transparent and open. So, so that's all to say that I think when the opportunity came to be a school chaplain in Macquarie Fields, which at that time was described as one of the most deprived areas in Australia, highest domestic violence rate, highest single parent rate. And we had an excellent school there with a great principal, Jill Pearce, and others. That when I was asked to be the school chaplain there and then also to plant a church there, I just knew that that's the kind of church that I'd want to lead, the type of ministry I'd want to lead. But then the other thing I learned as well is actually that's what the area needed, they really did not need someone coming in to tell them all the things they had done wrong. And then just to my delight, I really just grew, like in that area, and I just came to see that. I remember it was full on area, and I remember when I would drop people off, it was not uncommon for a lot of the staff who worked there at the time to come from other parts of Sydney, and I think the community knew that, and that's not a criticism on those people, but I would always remember when I'd drop people off on Friday nights, families, and then they would say to me, "Oh, where are you going?" Thinking that I was going back to Warunga or Strathfield or somewhere like that. They go, "Where do you live, Andre?" And then I said, "Oh, I live on Eucalyptus Drive, which is right in the heart of Macquarie Fields." And I remember every single time just the smile in their eyes and on their face, and they'd look at me like, "You live here?" So like, "You're one of us," And I think, I think just during that time, it just was such a privilege to work in that area and to grow a really authentic church where people could just feel like they could be themselves, And it was so crazy because you'd invite people to church, and because it was such an unchurched area, that when you said, "I'll come to church on Saturday," hardly anyone would go, "Well, don't you mean Sunday?" Because they didn't go to church at all. They were like, "Cool, I'll come on Saturday," And it was really, they weren't aware, yeah. So I had so many just really cool experiences there that I think also just affirmed for me that this is the type of church and the type of ministry that works actually, and that people want to see,
Yeah. So you came across a model that was working and a template that was working, and it was kind of growing as well to the...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, to be honest, can I just say that it actually wasn't a template, that
Right.
there wasn't necessarily terms of reference for it, because,
Right.
Adventist churches, it doesn't matter where you go to in the world, yes, and there's something that's wonderful about that. They're quite predictable, they feel safe, and they feel very Adventist,
Yeah.
So what we were doing, like our first church service was in a science lab, and I remember, in the corner there was a skeleton with a Zombero Mexican hat on, and I think at first it really challenged my notions of what a church was as well. At first I was thinking, "Oh my gosh, what are we doing here?" We didn't even have a praise and worship. I remember, back in the 80s, you'd have backing tracks. We couldn't even afford backing tracks. We would play like Hillsong CD of Brooke Fraser singing, and we'd have to sing over it, So I think even for me, as open-minded as I was, my notions of church were really being challenged. But what I started to realize sooner than later was that actually, my idea of what church was and what people were wanting was something totally different. They just wanted belonging. They wanted to know that God loved them, and as demonstrated through us, and all the people that were there. And there was just a fantastic church planting team that are around there that, just friends for life. So because of that experience.
That's great. And did you study at Avondale College?
So part of my lucky deal was that I got asked to do my job, and then as part of doing my job was that they would train me on the job. So that included training at Avondale College. Yeah.
Right. Because I think when you were on the Haystack podcast, Burn the Haystack, were you at college with one of the guys? Or
No,
both
so
of
I mean,
them?
no. So I mean, I always joke because all these guys that are pastors now, a lot of them, when they were at high school, I would go as a visiting speaker to their school.
Right.
So many of them now who have become pastors and ordained, that I still remember them when they were like year 13, year 12.
Right. Because I could tell in the interview that you knew each other. Yeah.
So, which is so cool. It was so cool to see those guys just, grow into great, amazing pastors.
Yeah. And it's a great podcast too. Recommend people go and check it out. Burn the Haystack.
Oh, yeah, you're amazing.
Yeah. So, when you finished your course and became an official Seventh-day Adventist pastor, tell us where did you then go? Where were you sort of sent for your...
Yeah, so sorry if I didn't explain properly that. So I got hired and I trained on the job. So I was hired as I was trained.
But
so
did you then just stay at that one church, or did you move around?
church in the fields. Sorry, at
Oh,
that
okay.
time it was MacArthur Adventist College in Macquarie Fields, and then we planted a church which is called Church in the Fields.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
and
So
then
you
I
did, yeah.
eventually left there to return home to New Zealand, and then became pastor of a church which is called Capital Church now, formerly called Powerhouse. And that's a church that I still go to now, even though I'm not the pastor. And got a fantastic, great pastor who's a dear friend of mine, Pastor Kirsten there.
And
Yeah.
that's an Adventist church, as you said
Yes.
earlier. And that's in Wellington area, is it?
That's in Wellington City. So
Right,
right in the heart of the city. Yeah.
right.
Ironically, both churches that I've pastored, people would come, it was not uncommon for people to come to church, like Adventists who were visiting, and they'll talk to me, and I would be in my casual clothes, and they'd be like, "So who's the pastor around here?" And then
Yeah, you'd
they
say,
would
I
know
am.
it was me. And then the other thing that always happened, because people would come and really enjoy it ourselves at both the churches, they're so unique and they're so special that they're the types of churches. If you're Adventist, I always say you either love it or you hate it.
Yeah.
But if you love it, one of the questions that we always get is like, "So are you guys part of the conference?"
Yeah,
So
that's right.
because the formula of church is so, we know what to expect, I suppose, from the Adventist church, that when there's anything that sort of, deviates from that, we
So,
sort of question its legitimacy.
yeah, it mustn't be part of the mothership.
Yeah,
Do
yeah.
do you find that, so this, and don't have to talk about the church you're involved with, but the similar little satellite churches that are open to gay rainbow community, um, is are they still able to be that way? Are things changing? Is there pressure coming on them to be less inclusive? Like, I'm thinking of the compliance document, which basically, among 5 or 6 other things, says
Mm,
that Adventist leaders must not publicly support women's ordination or gay marriage, etc.
mm. Oh gosh, I'm
Uh,
not familiar with that particular documentary, but certainly I'm familiar with that sort of belief system. So just to clarify, my church that I'm a part of is part of our North New Zealand conference. So the policy, is the same as the denominations.
right,
However,
right.
I suppose my local church and the way that they accept me and love me and other people that are rainbow, that's what they will do in practice in terms of what they believe is in terms of living out, the
Right.
gospel.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that type of, and I can't and shouldn't speak for the pastor,
No.
but I'm sure that type of inclusive attitude, unfortunately, sometimes, might invite some criticism, I imagine,
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So I think, it's probably, yeah.
Yeah, they probably would invite that sort of criticism, and possibly they would feel uncomfortable if they came on a show like this and I said, "Do you support the rainbow community?" They may find that
Yeah.
they'd have to be careful how they answered that.
No, I think they would say they absolutely do support the rainbow community,
Right.
but I think they would say that is, that's what they have decided as a local church, as opposed to the policy. But sorry, I shouldn't speak for them.
No, and I shouldn't even be inferring that you should at all. Like, I guess if any of them are watching and would love to come on my show as an ally, I'd love to hear them. So I'm trying to not cajole or be mean, but I'm just trying to encourage some of the Adventist leaders who are in conference or church positions, just come on the show, because there is an audience of people that are watching that would greatly feel relieved that there's public support for them.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to create public support and awareness. That's all.
Totally. Yeah. I have to say, my church is so amazing. They're just, myself and another friend who's rainbow, we brought rainbow friends to church, and they just love it there. They feel very safe. They feel great. I think the other thing that I would raise, though, is that it's just important to note that there are some people who are rainbow that want to go to an Adventist church and don't necessarily want to see it becoming politically rainbow and affirming, because they don't necessarily want to stick out, for their
Yes,
sexuality. They just want to go in and blend in and just be like everyone else.
that's an important point, actually.
So, I mean, I think there's a continuum in terms of, but, I think some people want to see that social change and, see the church, you know, take responsibility and provide some of that type of leadership. And then there are others, obviously, who just want to come to church and, just like other people do, just want to come to church and get their fix and, and contribute, but without their sexuality being the main definer.
Yeah, I can understand that. And I think sometimes I could be criticized for trying to push, some change as well, because sometimes people just want to go along and enjoy their community church and not have the boat rocked at all. And I understand that.
Yeah. But can I just say, Peter, I think the type of advocacy you're doing is crucial. Do you know?
Oh, okay.
I mean, when I think of what you're doing in the Adventist church around the world, I'm struggling to think of others as well that are doing that. There's certainly
good to hear.
There's, I don't know, I really can't think of a lot more. So there's certainly like Rainbow people who have got their own platform and then inviting others who are also Rainbow to come on, but people like you and few and far between. So yeah, thanks for doing that.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that, because sometimes you're so close to it, it's hard to be objective.
No.
I think I've stumbled across a unique platform just due to lockdown and my having left the church, but still have great Adventist friends and family, and it's a bit of a subculture I still identify with. So the audience that watches are from a broad spectrum of Adventism. Like you say, it's not just an Adventist program speaking to one specific audience, and that causes a lot of conflict sometimes. But I think it's a healthy thing to have a wider audience. So yeah.
Totally.
So can you tell us? I'm a bit confused with the timeline of. I think when you were on the Insight show, tell us a little bit about what led up to that. Were you still an Adventist pastor? From memory, you'd left the employment by then. Tell us a little bit about that time period and going on to the show and what it was like as well.
Yeah. So I left denominational employment at the end of 2016, I think. Yeah. But the reason I left was because I knew that I wanted to come out, because a year before that I had turned 40, and I had realized, and if you asked me age 25 when I gave my life to Jesus, I would have said I will forever deny my sexuality because of my love for Jesus.
Wow.
So I did that. I went through conversion therapy, conversion practices, courses, and other things. And then when I got to age 40, it just really, I just realized for the first time that all of my praying, fasting, courses, lots of other things was not going to affect me becoming straight. I'd sort of realized that I'd been hoodwinked in some ways, that I was believing a myth,
Yeah.
There are people that have been able to suppress, not to change, to suppress their sexuality. Yes. And I say good on them, but that is a really rare example. And I think there's been a trade-off for the people that have done that. And the trade-off has been wonderful things like a career, family, children, and that, kudos to them. I'm not criticizing their approach, but they're anomalous. That's not normal. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say normal. That's not the regular. It's
not common. It's not common. Yeah. And I think, imagine though, coming to the end of your life and going, I didn't live my authentic life. I was acting. So if you're suppressing the true you, look, I'm all for discipline. We've got to discipline different behaviors, but you can't discipline your very self. Do you know what I mean? Your very core identity. You've got to be who you are, and you've got to be your own person. And I think how great that at 40, with still many years to go, you realized that you wanted to live a life of purpose and meaning and be you, just simply to
Yeah,
be the true you.
I know. So I now know that to be the case, but Peter, let me tell you, at that time, that was
Yeah,
not the case at all. I mean, I
yeah,
didn't know what was on the other side of that.
yeah.
You know,
Would have been
there was
daunting.
so much fear. There was like, okay, you know, will God still like me?
Yeah,
I definitely knew there wasn't going to be a job for me. No one had to tell me to resign. I knew,
right.
you
Yeah,
know, like I and I wondered, I mean, so much of my and I don't mean this in a bad way, I just mean this in a normal way. So much of your identity becomes involved in your job, right? Because
yeah,
that's what you do. That's what you're known for. That's what you know how to do and get paid to do and train for. So yeah,
yeah.
there was a lot of uncertainty.
I think,
Now it's kind of a no-brainer, but at the time
yeah,
was really scary.
I 100% get that. And I
Yeah,
think that's why your story is so important, because
yeah,
what we're trying to do is offer people hope that yes, it's
yeah,
daunting. Yes, there's
yeah,
these issues you're going to face. Yes, there's going to be a loss of identity, but
yeah,
here's someone like yourself that has been through that. You can
yeah,
survive. You can find happiness on the other
yeah.
side. I think people
Totally.
need to see this thread of from
Yeah,
darkness to
yeah,
change to
yeah,
meaning and purpose. And I think
totally.
people can see that in your story, which is why it's great to hear it.
Oh, well, I hope so. So, so I stopped being a pastor, but then being, and I think because I love God and I love preaching, and I stopped being a pastor, but I still was accepting preaching engagements, Um, and then I'd always think, okay, this would be the last engagement I um, accept, and then there'll be a space of time, and then I'll come out. But the problem is that those engagements just didn't stop coming, and now I was keeping myself in the closet, and now I wasn't even getting paid to be a pastor. So it was
So
now like,
you weren't getting to be free with
no,
exploring your new identity or your a real
no.
identity. Uh,
And I remember it was September, and I was starting to get invitations for the following year for a big camp and some other stuff. And I thought, well, one part of me was like, I'm good at this and I love doing it. The other part of me was like, you're no better off than you were a year ago. You don't have the pressure of being
mm,
a paid pastor, but you've still got this attached to you.
yeah,
So I
yeah.
kind of made the call to stop the cause, and that was really hard. Like, especially if you're an Adventist pastor and you get, like, I'm just going to be honest, like if you get like a big camp call, that's a really big deal, and you're like, and you enjoy it, and you know
Yeah.
that God's going to use you.
There's
Um,
connection and fun and
yeah,
community. It's great.
totally,
Yeah.
totally. But then I knew that it had to stop somewhere, so it was kind of hard. But then I did. But then something else happened around that same time is that up until this time, it wasn't just about coming out for me. It was also starting to explore um, what would it mean to be gay and what would it mean to be a Christian as well. So up until this point, I thought, okay, you can be gay, and in the back of your mind, you can know that God loves you, but you're basically nursing the sin. So
Mm.
around that time, I said no. I started to actually listen to podcasts and started to explore people like Matthew Vines and others that talk about having both a faith and a sexual orientation, such as mine. And then I started to learn about different biblical interpretations of the so-called clobber texts. And my mind was blown away, really, and I just realized, because up until that point and growing up, I would always view those people as, being of Satan or the devil or having lost their mind. And,
Mm,
and now
mm,
I was starting to look into it for myself and to educate myself. And I was starting to just learn so many things that just made sense to me, from a biblical perspective and lots of other sorts of things.
mm, mm.
And so then I started to think, oh my gosh, like this is not only, I just thought, okay, there's some good grounds here for stuff. Cut a long story short, I then started the process of telling more people than just my family about my sexuality. And and then I started a really amazing job at the New Zealand Human Rights Commission.
Mm.
And I think that was the first time in terms of a job that I'd sort of come out to anyone outside friends or family. And I really do believe God used that job to help me just grow in my own sexuality, my own confidence and stuff. So being in that job, I just kind of really felt like it was just a matter of time before I came out publicly, because there was so much things that I wanted to say, so many things that I wanted to. I mean, I was finding all this stuff out at age 40 now plus, and by mistake. And I was like, someone needs to share this information, And around the same time, Israel Folau had started, for the second year in a row now, by this time it was 2019, had started saying what he was saying about gays going to hell and the media saga that accompanied that. Around that time, I keep going onto Facebook and I just keep seeing lots of Adventists and lots of Christians on my Facebook line saying the most horrible things about rainbow people, really uninformed, really ignorant, and really hateful things. And then, and I was just really feeling a sense of responsibility and a sense of duty to that. So I feel like God's amazing, because in my job, one of the things that we learn to do is, we help write articles and media, like for other people, like for commissioners and stuff. And so by that time, I had learned how to write for other people. And, when you share an opinion on something, and as I was watching this Israel Folau situation flare up, I was like, oh, actually, I've got something to say here as well. The other thing, and so anyway, cut a long story short, that's when I decided that I was going to write something about it in the Sydney Morning Herald.
That's right.
Yeah, and then that article also got published
So what time was that? What month and year was that? Do you remember?
It was December 2019.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's before the Insight interview, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's when I first became. I'd heard of you, just through the Adventist, grapevine and whatnot, and then that's when I thought, wow, this is a big thing.
Yeah.
That article. So sorry, go on.
No. So that article went viral. Basically, it got published in the Sydney Morning Herald and then also in the Melbourne Age on the same day. And they got picked up and stuff in New Zealand and the Samoa Observer in Samoa, So,
wow.
a lot of people read it. And the other thing,
had a lot of people that you knew didn't know you were gay at this stage. It was like a big coming out in some ways, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I mean, for me, there are some people that would always say to me, like, oh, I always knew. And I feel like saying, oh, well, good on you. You got a medal, And it wasn't that I was trying to hide my sexuality. Like, I knew I was gay and I'd actually told it to people, but it was more that I was trying to be straight, so I wasn't trying to pass as straight. I was trying to be straight.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think the other thing that was really important for me is that when I knew that I was going to come out, I think because I got to preach in so many places and because a lot of people knew me as a pastor in the Adventist circles, that what I didn't want, and this may sound a bit vain, but I knew that if I was going to come out, that the gossip mill was going to really churn. And I knew that if I was going to come out, it was going to have to be publicly, so that, in some way that I would be able to have some sort of control around the narrative around me.
Yeah.
Because often what happens is people leave ministry and they leave for a bad reason,
Yeah.
And I didn't want that, I wanted to. So anyway, I think so I think the op-ed was helpful in that way, in terms of sharing my story, hoping that it could help others, but then also just commenting on that situation. So after that, obviously, because it went viral, a lot of people took note, and then that's when I got contacted by SBS in Australia for that Insight program. Then they contacted me, and then and then went on that show in Australia at the beginning of 2020, I think. Before COVID.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a really good program. I think it's still available. If people Google it, they can. It's still possible to see.
Yeah.
Tell us just a little bit of the fallout of both of those. Were there? I mean, you would have, like I said, it went viral. Tell us, was there any negative fallout from that, or was it mainly a positive kind of relief to have a bit more control over it?
I thought it was only going to be negative. What surprised me was the positive response. I just didn't think there would be a positive response. I think, and this is the terrible thing when you live in the closet and when you're so ashamed of yourself, you just assume the worst, every
Mm,
single time. Right?
mm.
Instead, like even from within Christianity, even from with conservative friends, I think people were being very kind to me. There were a few negative comments that I saw. There's probably many more behind the scenes that I didn't see. Someone refers to me publicly as, or implying, I think it was me, as, sheep in wolf's clothing.
Right.
One website said that I must have a mental health illness to think that I could be Christian and to be gay. So there were those kind of comments
Yeah.
around. And then, have recently read a letter about me, an open letter to the SPD president saying that, you may know him. He talks about love, etc. As if
Yeah.
love is a sort of peripheral, sort of minor sort of detail.
Yeah.
So there's been a bit of that, but none of that compares to the overwhelming, not only positive response that I've gotten from so many different quarters,
Mm,
but more importantly, actually how I feel about myself. And I think my
yeah.
confidence has grown, my respect for self and for others has grown. And, I love being me. I love God, love being gay, love being um, you know, being associated to God,
Mm, mm.
yeah, it's cool. I just feel very happy. And even though 40 is somewhat late, and sometimes I've stopped doing it now, but there was a point where I just lamented that, in fact, all my sort of prime years, 20s and 30s, was spent, like in the closet, during those years where most people are like hooking up, finding relationships for life and children, that I sort of didn't have that opportunity, so I did
Mm,
used to lament
mm.
that. But no longer. I'm so happy it happened when I was 40 and not older.
Yeah. And how many people never wake up? That's
Yeah.
the big
Yeah.
thing. I reckon
Yeah.
good 90% of people just live their whole lives in
Yeah.
fear of being their true self
Yeah. And
and
can I just say
die
for
having acted the whole episode.
yeah. And for those people, my heart goes out to them because I know how hard it is. It's often less about them and more about all the other people they feel like they'll let down.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
know,
yeah.
the stakes are so high,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
yeah.
It's
So
very hard. And I
yeah,
think, like you were talking about cancel culture, it's even harder today than ever to be your true self in public. And I don't think people have to be a kind of a true self that bears all, but I
yeah,
think I think I'm talking about a kind of an authenticity
yeah,
that is a knowledge to yourself and your close friends of who you really
totally,
are.
absolutely.
Some people spend their whole lives not even having that. We don't
Mm,
have to be transparent to everybody.
mm,
That'd be ridiculous. But to
yeah.
have a small group of friends you can be true to, and you were probably pre-40, you were probably having to kind of mask yourself
Oh, yeah.
even then.
Well,
Yeah.
it's funny because even because I was pretty open, I did really just share a lot of my journey over the years with people. So I wasn't like keeping it a secret. I think I'd
Mm.
learned early on though, because I was so transparent and used to just share it with anyone and everyone, that I realized that in the church, that wasn't going to help you. So then I sort of just was more careful about who I shared
Mhm.
that um, with. I forgot. I'm sorry, I've lost my thought.
No, that's all right.
Yeah,
We were just talking about being authentic
yeah,
and
yeah.
how difficult it can be and how that it's fine to have discipline and parameters
Mm,
that you keep in control. Nothing wrong with being in control of your own life and destiny.
yeah,
When I chatted to Wayne Blakely on the show, he's a proponent. He wouldn't call it conversion therapy, and so I definitely don't want to put words into his mouth at all. And it was a good interview. I got a lot of flack for interviewing him because he's not supportive of the coming out and living your life as gay, and but when you hear his story and you see the frame and the anchor points that he has had to have in his life, I mean, he I think he said on the show, like he was 12 years at least just lost in this really kind of crazy lifestyle that was detrimental to him. And so you can see for him to have a God anchor that is incredibly disciplined, with the idea of keeping all kind of activity that's anything to do with sexuality, with same-sex relationships out of the picture. You can kind of see why for him he either needs to have that in his life, or you can see why he is like that, whether you agree with it or not. But
Yeah.
I want to highlight to people that I think any kind of conversion therapy is very dangerous and bad
Absolutely.
for you. And you mentioned that you'd been through
Yeah.
a few of the courses. Can you kind of chat a little
Yeah.
bit your thoughts
Sure.
on conversion therapy? Just dig into
Yeah.
that a little bit more.
Sure. Just before I jump into that, I don't know Wayne, this person that you're speaking of, and I haven't listened to the interview. I'm sorry about that. But can I just comment on one thing? Often what happens with people who profess to be ex-gay, and I profess to be ex-gay too, by the way, back in the day, after I'd given my life to Jesus, is that my friend Anthony Venn Brown, who was a former AOG pastor and one of the leaders in terms of this area, being ex-gay in Australia, he sums this up so well, and I've sort of applied my Adventist sort of layer over it. But do you know how at some Adventist things, like when we become Christians, then we throw out all of our secular CDs?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've done that so many times, and I know so many Adventists that have done that, right?
In my day, it was burn the vinyl records.
Yeah, right. Okay. What we're doing is we're sort of like purging of it. But what happens with the ex-gay movement is that they treat sexuality like it's a CD or a record. The problem is that it's not. You're stuck with your sexuality. You can't throw that at the baby with the bathwater. And so what we do is, because we're desiring discipline from an undisciplined life, that we think that it needs form and discipline, so we get rid of stuff. The problem is you can't do what you do to a CD and a record to your sexuality.
Exactly.
So I get the logic, but it's not tested well, in my opinion. And so I think that's when you need a scientific health base to actually say you can't throw away sexuality. I'm sorry for them to look at that. So what you can do is the destructive behaviors that you did while you were living out your sexuality, you can throw those out, but you can't throw your sexuality out. So
exactly. That's a good point, a good way of looking at it.
Yeah. So that's leads us nicely into what the media often refers to as conversion therapy, but in Australia and in New Zealand, increasingly, and should be referred to as conversion practices, because therapy is, number one, sort of connotes that a therapy actually works and that a therapy is actually legitimate. So there's nothing legitimate about conversion practices. But secondly, the whole premise of conversion practices is this idea that with enough discipline, with enough prayer, with enough reading of the Bible, with courses and all these other sorts of things, that you can try to affect a straight orientation from being gay or from being trans or something. So I tried all of that while I was in Sydney, went to courses, paid. And this is the other thing, there's a lot of cost to this. I've got friends that paid lots of money, taken years off work to try to become this, and everyone unfortunately lies to you all the way through. They tell you that you can become straight, and then you find out later that the people that were telling you to do that behind the scenes were either doing some other stuff, or they weren't doing things, but what they didn't tell you was deeply how unhappy they have been. Because they're trying to control to the 9th degree something that cannot be controlled. So I went through all of that, and that was basically everyone in New Zealand. They've recently, because the legislation bill is underway in Parliament currently, making its way through the House to burn conversion practices in New Zealand. They opened up select committee submissions from everyone, and it had more people submitting to this, 100,000 people, than have on any other legislation or bill previously. But every single account shared by a survivor of conversion practices shares that as a result of being involved in these practices, the only thing that they were left with at the end of it was wanting to suicide. Like, that is just the theme. Because you are taught a lie that you can change and that you should. And so you're banging your head against the wall, and especially when God's involved, because you feel like you've let him down. And so then you feel like, well, your only option then is to, I'm the person that's faulty. I'm the default good. So I must be the problem. I need to get rid of it.
Yes.
And also, because you've exhausted everything, that's the only option for you. So it's deeply harmful. Like, to say that it's harmful is an understatement. It's
yes.
dangerous.
Yeah. And that's why I was very cautious also about interviewing Wayne, who is a nice guy, by the way. I want to highlight that.
Yeah.
But I don't want to put anyone on the show that's kind of promoting a certain possibility that is dangerous. And so even in the interview, I was making it clear that I didn't support his work. Because you're right, it's dangerous. It's dangerous. It destroys souls and personalities and beings and literally lives.
Yeah. I don't know Wayne, and I imagine he's a lovely person because everyone's lovely, do you know? What I would just say is that for people who choose that path, and power to them, I honestly do mean that. Just because I've come out, I don't expect people to come out. Some people are just going to be absolutely happier doing what they're doing, and that's for them to decide. And, we're all different. My only thing would be is don't downplay or don't be dishonest in terms of the cost to you. I think if you're going to prescribe that, or even if you're going to say that this is working for you, you should be absolutely truthful in terms of the cost that comes, because I think people that will follow in your footsteps, as I try to follow in other people's, they just don't have the full story. And and I think by the time I realized that people were not happy, a number of people weren't happy, that's when I just realized that it wasn't going to work for me. Had I known that earlier, I would have made, I would have made this decision a long time ago, I think.
And to be honest, again, I think, and we have I can't think of an SPD Union Adventist pastor, ordained leader that isn't a nice person. I remember years ago singing at the SPD Christmas function, and it was just fantastic. Brilliant people, a lot of fun. It was just a really good night. And I know a lot of them personally, and they're lovely people. But by not speaking into the conversation, by remaining silent, they also are doing, I believe, almost as much damage as those who promote conversion practices. And I just feel at that point needs to be hammered home that, please, leaders, there's people out there that just need your public support on social media.
Yeah.
But that's just my 2 cents on that topic. You mentioned earlier about the clobber texts. I'm really looking forward to that book coming out by Alicia Johnson. Do you know her at all? And have you
Facebook friends. Remember when she came out, and at that time I was a pastor, I didn't necessarily have a view. I was just like, okay. I think what I would have thought, and I don't think I thought this of Alicia specifically, but in general, I would have thought, oh, they've given up. I'm going to continue to try.
Yes.
So
Okay.
even when some of the ex-gay ministries closed, I thought, they've dropped it, like who's going to stand for truth, etc. Which is obviously what some people probably think of me,
Yeah, that's But the more people that eventually do say, "Hang on, that's not working," that's got to gain some kind of momentum. But when her book comes out, we're going to interview her again, because I think it's from what I've heard about it, it's going to really help clarify some of the, because I think even
she's amazing. I think, this is how small Adventism is that I remember when she came out, I specifically remember that years ago. Do you know? And so the fact that I can remember, many of us know that within the worldwide church just shows how few people have actually done it.
There's a lot of ignorance, I think, out there on a lot of the leaders' side. And when I read that tweet by Ted Wilson, and I'm not asking you to comment on it. You don't have to comment at all. I'm just saying that when it came out, I thought, I don't mind people defining a denomination or a movement or a system with certain boundaries and rules, but that people have to adhere to. But you've got to keep in mind that, like you say, you were third generation Adventist. I was fifth generation Adventist. A lot of us are born into this. If we were adults and looked at it, we'd probably go, that's a bunch of crazy I'm not going to sign up for. So a lot of the edicts and laws that they're getting stricter on kind of don't take that into account. But not only that, his tweet was just ignorant on the LGBTQIA part of it, the I and the A. His comments were just, be defined, be strong in what you think Adventism should be, but at least try and learn some of the facts. And again, I'm not even really saying that to criticize him. In some ways, he's defining Adventism, and a lot of the more progressive liberals are a bit wishy-washy. But I think unless people are having these conversations, the ignorance is going to continue. And while people are silent, the ignorance will continue. There's an interview he did with someone in Russia, and he was talking. Oh, look, I won't even go into it because I can't remember the details. But there was a kind of an implication that if you are gay, you can be in the church, but you can't be having positions of leadership. Is that true? Is there what's the policy on that within the Adventist Church? To have can you be an elder if you're gay, or do they?
Yeah, I don't even think you can. Some of my good friends have actually shared about this, that once you come out as gay, like, get ready for, duties such as, and this is not disparaging the people that have these duties, but for behind the scenes things like being on the PA, the less you basically will get sidelined and you won't get any sort of visible type of duties. At best, you might be allowed on the praise and worship team, but I think that would come with a lot of debates behind the scenes that
and you probably need to say that you are gay but are not practicing. Probably a few caveats. It appears to me that a gay Adventist is more suppressed than a woman in Adventism, or marginalised, or ostracized, perhaps.
Oh, well, not one of the oppression Olympics, as you say in the human rights space.
We're more oppressed than you.
But I do, it's as bad as each other. I'm just, Sorry, I don't want to get negative.
No, that's all right.
No. So I would just say, though, it's really interesting to me, and I think this is a bit of a no-brainer, but as we look at the ministry of Jesus, it's just sort of direct contrast in terms of the way that we move through the world and the church, these days, I've just seen some comments that have come up and on, some people saying that they lost their role at church when they came out as transgender. So that's normal, unfortunately. The crazy thing is that, so many of us who are rainbow, we stay in the church long beyond others of our ages, while others are hooking up or, getting into partnerships. We often will stay there because there's nowhere else for us to go, and we find acceptance and belonging in the churches. And so we've nurtured, amazing and incredible gifts over the course of our lives. But for some reason, those gifts are no longer counted. They're no longer seen as legitimate, And it's so funny to me because I love preaching. I love God. But, I think people kind of feel like because I've come out that all of a sudden that gift is gone.
I know, but what a loss. Are you allowed to preach at the church you go to?
Yeah, so my church is really awesome. They allow me to, still get involved in church. We've got a small church, just to caveat that. So kind of all hands are on deck.
I wonder if they get into flack whenever you do.
Yeah, I think I should caveat my church allows a space for me to. I'm very clear though with my church that I know there's a cost to them by them being publicly supportive of me, and so I don't want them to bear
Yeah,
that cost because it's not worth
yeah.
stress for them or stress for me.
But how
But
sad is
I've
that,
got
you
a
know?
really supportive church. Yeah,
I
I mean,
just,
it's sad, especially in terms of Adventist denomination where people it's declining, and we're the one group when we're saying everyone come in, evangelize, doesn't matter where they come from, and then for us, the rainbow people were actually being sidelined and pushed out. So it's
yeah,
opposite to evangelism, and it's totally
yeah,
acceptable, fortunately. Yeah.
yeah. Isn't that that's a really interesting point. I'll just bring up this post that Kay wrote, which is very interesting. Oh, hang on, wrong one, I think. That this is a good one. This is awesome. Understanding that the rainbow people stay connected with people in the church community depends on how the individual person, rainbow or mainstream, express their leadership. But this one I just wanted to bring up. I don't believe Ted Wilson defines what Adventism is. We have to consider now who are the influential leaders, those that give voice. He may be defining what it isn't for many. And I agree with that, but I just can't point to any influential Adventist leader that is church employed that is giving a different spiel or saying they disagree with Ted.
Well, can I just say good luck to anyone that does that, Peter? Like, I mean, I just wouldn't want to put myself in that person's shoes. I think the
Yeah.
criticism would just be thick and fast,
Yeah, and until someone does, though, you have to accept that the president of the Adventist Church will have influence, even though he may not be defining Adventism.
Oh, yeah,
To,
for
to
sure.
non-Adventists, they're going to
Yeah.
see that as defining Adventism because there's no counter. There's no one else countering it.
Yeah, it's true. The other thing, though, is, and even when I was a pastor, and I'm going to say this and people are going to think this is disrespectful, but when I would watch what was happening with the worldwide church and some of the decisions they were making in terms of continuing to exclude, and acknowledge the role of women's ordination, etc. I think I just made a decision early on. I mean, around that time, because I used to get really invested in terms of the decisions the church was making in terms of policy. And then just for my own mental health, I thought, you know what, I'm just going to really concentrate on what's in my sphere of influence. And I've got a relationship with God that's not with the church, because otherwise, and I don't mean to say fatalistic, I don't mean to say that we need to accept the status quo, but I mean, I just think the cogs ever changing in our worldwide church are just going to be incredibly hard, and long. So I just sort of I just don't even reference it anymore. I mean, I don't even it doesn't define who I am as a, follower of God. Yeah.
I agree, and I think that's good. And I think I just think, I like, for me being an older dad, I'm to you off air there with 7-year-old and 9-year-old little girls. I don't know. They just it's hard. On the one hand, it seems like it's never going to change. On the other hand, you want to enjoy life, so you want to have social and community with those that are close to you and kind of push the other bit aside. But then I kind of think Jesus came in, cleared the temple with his whip and his sandals, and so there's a time to make a stand, but that doesn't mean everyone has to make a stand. But I just wish those who are called to make a stand would
Sure.
make a stand.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah. No, I hear.
Sometimes I just don't hear the collective voice.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard, isn't it? Because I think there's also this within Adventism, Adventist culture. There's this sort of niceness, that sort of exists, and so that niceness then means being quiet on a lot of stuff, to not rock the boat.
Mm.
wider thing, even non-political issues. And I think that's a nicety of Adventist culture that's actually quite dysfunctional and unhelpful.
Yeah.
So I agree. I mean, that's why I just am not optimistic in any way in terms of any change.
No.
Like,
Yeah.
we'll see, but I think, as you were saying, it happens in the small satellite churches and people just having a better conversation, more informed conversation amongst their friends.
Yeah. I just wonder if during the civil rights movement, if there'd not been a Martin Luther King, if there'd not been a Sister Rosa Parks, you know.
Peter, that's exactly what I was thinking of. I was thinking of that that very same thing. But just to be fair to Adventism, and I know I'm sounding really pleasy, but actually it's not happening in any denomination, you know. I think the problem is Christianity in terms of the way that it's interpreted these clobber texts.
Yeah. And look, I'm really looking forward to Alicia's book because I want to understand these clobber texts better myself. Like, I think, if from my perspective, and I haven't dug in, so don't quote me on this as my thought, but on a cursory glance at the Bible, with a non-academic kind of look at it, it doesn't look too good for women or gay people, no matter which way you turn it. But like I said, I'm looking forward to reading the book because I'll get a greater insight into it.
Yeah. Look, I've always I got interviewed on mainstream TV here a couple of years ago on a breakfast TV show, and they said, but what about what the Bible says about homosexuality? And I said, well, actually, the Bible says a lot of things about a lot of things, you know.
Yeah, I know.
And unfortunately, the Bible can be used to support a whole bunch of discriminatory views, you know, whether it's around women, whether that's supportive of genocide, murder, family violence, racism, slavery, segregation, incest, you name it. So
stoning people that don't keep the Sabbath.
Absolutely.
Support of slavery and indentured souls.
Xenophobia, blah, blah, blah.
So maybe the problem isn't Christianity, it's the Bible.
Yeah, well, I think the point is that over the years we've had to evolve our understanding of the Bible in light of these contemporary issues, so that we can hold both a faith, belief in the Bible, etc., and also be able to move through the world and not be a terrible person, you know. And all we keep saying, those of us who are rainbow, is it's our time now too, just as you've done, you know. And unfortunately, the church never of its own volition has come to the right decision for itself. It's always been forced, like, to do the right thing, whether it's, you know, civil rights, racism, segregation. They never put up their hand to do that. It was Martin Luther King, church background. But, you know, churches were segregated in a number of different places, not just America. So this idea that the church is the moral light is a bit of a joke, you know.
Boy, that's what a sobering thought, Andre.
So anyway, so I think we just need to have a humble view of these matters, because we I mean, even in terms of, even when I was in ministry, you know, when it comes to a family violence situation, and, you know, we have this deep empathy and sympathy for men, you know, who are violent towards their wife or their children. Not so much now, but 10 years ago, we even were then. You know, we say all those things like, oh, they must be going through a hard time. Have you done this? Have you done that? You know? Thankfully, that has changed in the last 10 years. But, you know, as far back as 5-10 years ago, the rhetoric was still very much, you know, in view of, like, supporting that type of violence. So we just need to continue to move that needle. We've done it for other issues. We need to do this for people as well.
And I wonder if we can find a balance. Like, I am totally happy with my life, and I have great meaning and purpose, and enjoy my girls and family, but I also find that I can speak out a bit as well. I wonder if we can find that balance where we can find our nice little local church that supports us, and we can go, oh, this is great. let the church at large kind of just do what it wants,
Yeah.
but also speak into the conversation as well.
Yeah.
It's a hard one, isn't it? Because as soon as you speak into something where you see injustice,
Yeah.
you get hammered for it.
Oh, totally.
So it kind of
Absolutely.
makes you a bit weary and think, you know what, forget it.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, that's why I'm always going to my church. They're so loving and accepting towards me, but I always worry about the cost it will mean for them, in terms of the criticism that they will receive, the criticism I
Yeah.
will receive. Yeah, which is
And
crazy because it's just for simply being loving and accepting of me,
I know. That's why I love the teachings of Jesus, because
Yeah.
you cannot find any of the things we were talking about earlier that the Bible can be misconstrued. You cannot find that in the teachings of Jesus.
Totally.
They're unlike the teachings of Paul, which are contextual. The teachings of Jesus survive the test of time. And that's where I personally, not even the supernatural Jesus, I personally love looking at Jesus. What did he say? What were his teachings?
Totally.
And it makes a lot more sense and puts things into perspective, I think.
Absolutely.
Someone's just written a nice thing here I thought we'd share. I believe Andre has a very strong influence on SDA values and ethics. I know my children who have been connected to his ministry over time have been influenced by his authentic Christianity. That's
Oh, that's lovely.
a lovely thing to hear, isn't it?
Thank
Can
you.
we've kind of touched on this in a way, but where are you now with the church and with God? Like, it sounds like you're enjoying your local church, but do you have an association with them on a broader scale? And tell us a little bit about your relationship with God as well.
Yeah. So, can I just say, take off my hat to all pastors, but especially Adventist pastors. It's not an easy job, So it's full on, I think in Adventism we sort of have this notion and idea that we own our pastors because we pay for them by tithe.
Yeah.
And so, many pastors feel police don't, they're forever just putting their family and their own self, on the back pedal for because of their ministry and because they get paid for it, etc. Anyway, that's all to say that I respect those who are pastors, but I also enjoy not being a pastor because of that pressure as well. So part of my local church, I go to church every single week. And also when I stopped, the pressure that came from being with a pastor meant that, I read my Bible heaps. I pray with God heaps, I have to be honest, though, I'm very selective now about what I read in the Bible. As the years have gone on since coming out, I become much more selective about what I read in the Bible. Before I could read anything on any page. These days, if I'm really honest, I find it really hard to read the writings of Paul, just because I know the way that his views have been used against so many people. And I know that when I'm reading those texts, how people are interpreting that and going to use that against different groups of people. So I really do struggle to read his writings. When I have, like for instance, when I'm doing a Bible plan, I literally will miss whole bunches of the Bible and read them last, and I have to pray before I read. This one's just so triggering.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's not because people go, oh, that's because you don't want to accept the truth. No, it's because I know the way that the so-called truth
Yeah, that's
has
right.
been used and harmed people. So it's a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, yeah. I personally only read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John now.
Yeah. So that stuff's easier for me. And then I think in terms of the church, I love and respect so many people who are employed by the church and represent the church, but the church is not God in any way. I always say, stop worrying about people. Say, are they going to be there? Are they there on your deathbed? Do they help you pay your bills? Will they defend you and stick up for you? No, they won't. And not because they're mean people, but they just won't,
No.
So why do we live our lives so in fear of trying to please different people? So, at the end of the day, it's just God. And for me, Jesus, God, it's about, I care less about what you say and more about how it's demonstrated, and the difference it's making in your own life and the lives of other people as well. So to me, that's the type of religion that I really respect.
Well, that's a good one.
Yeah.
You respect not what they say, but how they demonstrate.
Oh, yeah.
That's great.
Every time.
Yeah.
And on that note, I really love, I mean, those are the types of Christians I've always respected, but even more so now.
Mm.
But also, I have to say that now as a non-pastor, actually, just in general, in my job, I get to meet people from lots of different faiths who are non-Christians. And the ones that just demonstrate love and live it out, I just have the utmost respect for.
Yeah.
I just like, wow, I want to be what they are. Like, if that's what your faith looks like, then, power to you. And then also people that agnostic or atheists who don't claim any religion, and they're
Yeah.
just the coolest. When I
Yeah.
say coolest, I mean the most respectful,
Yes.
kindest people. I'm just like, I see God in you,
Yeah.
like they might
Yeah.
not even think that, but I'm like, so much respect for you, like,
Yeah.
especially because they don't necessarily have a religious motivation or a basis to their behavior. And I've always found that people actually that don't have that motivation to their behavior are some of the most wonderful, attractive people to be around. I always
Good
find that those that
people.
are so deeply motivated by
Yeah.
something, just kind of you you always get that with them.
Yeah.
It always feels like
Yeah.
a bit of a sales pitch.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true. When you talk to agnostics and atheists that are good people with morals and virtue flowing from them, you'd know they're not selling anything. They're not
yeah,
trying to sell you, like you were saying, your parents hopped out of the car and all of a sudden it was Happy Sabbath, even though the morning was full of tears.
yeah, yeah.
It's
And
nice.
yeah,
It's nice to meet people that aren't selling anything, but they're still good people.
and it's not only that they're just not selling anything; they're good people. You know that when they're looking at you, they're not assessing you
Yeah.
to accept you. They just accept
Mm.
you. They're not
Yes.
looking at you like many people I know when I'm talking to Christians. They're like, "Oh, he's such a nice guy, but unfortunately, he's gay."
Yeah.
I know that's what they're thinking in the back of their mind. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, it's just so weird because we're meant to be the most accepting people.
Yeah.
Whereas some of those people, who don't have that religious background, just that not even a consideration for them.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So anyway, I love God. I distance myself from, I suppose, the term organized religion, even though ironically, I feel Adventist culturally, even though I go to my church every week when I'm not traveling. But in terms of organized religion, it's not for me. I've seen
Mm.
the harm that it has done for many people. I respect that it does lots of good things for some people as well. But certainly it's not my, I just think people need to have a relationship with God, with Jesus. And I do feel that the church and religion in general teaches us to be less loving, less accepting, more thinking too much about whether this person is a good person or not. Unfortunately, I think the
Mm.
nature of religion doesn't matter what religion it is; it teaches you that.
It's too
Ironically, I
judicious.
still, part of
Yeah.
feel Adventist, but I see that's what religion does. It teaches people to think like that, unfortunately.
And the irony is that you just go and read John or Mark,
Mm,
and the irony is as you see Jesus, his teachings and his life, he is the opposite of that.
totally.
And yet the institutions of
Yeah.
like imagine if Jesus was walking on the earth today.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So, can I just say that I'm not about throw the baby out the bathwater. I know that churches provide a whole bunch of good will and help to society and even to communities and even to ourselves. Like, I can see how it can provide people with something that's needed in their life. So I'm not saying it's all bad at all. I'm just saying
no,
by and large, though, I think systematically it teaches people these types of thinking. Yeah.
and I think it's really important for people to understand that if you are speaking to something that you don't think is functioning well, that doesn't mean that you don't like the
Oh,
whole
totally.
church or everybody. Like
Yeah.
it's fine to be to assess things to see if they're
Yeah.
helping the well-being of the community, and
Absolutely.
to like people
Yeah.
seem to think, oh, if you're critical, that means you hate everything and you're angry and bitter.
No way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just a very positive person. I'm just like, okay,
Mm,
don't criticize if you don't have something to bring to the table. You've got to bring something
mm,
constructive.
mm.
So I'm not one of these moaners. Like, I part of my church. I get to serve in my church. My church is really awesome to me. So I'm not just there like throwing stones and like being a whinger. Like
Yeah.
there's things I want to address that in the most
Yeah,
respectful way, a way
yeah,
that's inclusive for everyone. I don't like making people feel uncomfortable.
yeah. Every system needs someone or a number of people that are willing to kind of point out the areas that can be improved. Well,
Yeah.
that person mentioned earlier of what an influence you'd had on people and their children. Can you tell us, like, what kind of exciting projects have you got on the horizon? Are you actually running a ministry at the moment that people are involved with and can get involved with, or you're mainly focused on your new job?
Yeah, I'm focused on my jobs, but last year I got to be part of there's a network here in New Zealand called Diverse Church, and it's a whole bunch of people that basically had to leave the church, and it's a sort of a conference and a network of those of us who come from different religious backgrounds and still have a faith. And so anyway, I preached at this conference last year during Wellington Pride week, and I've preached like hundreds of times over the years, and it was the most amazing feeling to preach to a room full of rainbow people.
Wow, yeah,
It was unlike anything I've ever experienced in my whole life. It was beautiful. I think it was beautiful because I know a lot of people came there with so much hurt
yeah,
and so much pain, and I knew that because I have quite easily, and I don't mean this in a go Andre way, but I think I've been able to reconcile back my sexual orientation and my faith quite easily. There's a
that's
lot of people
great.
that, because they've been so burnt, they just don't have, and I get it, like I'm not criticizing them. So I kind of feel like an anomaly in that way. But I knew, because I still think of my faith in the church in a mostly positive way, that might be challenging for people as I'm preaching, because it could be triggering for them. But it was just awesome. I just love it. And I think for us, if you're rainbow and you've grown up Christian, you've always felt like you're an outsider. And for the
Yeah,
first time, it's so nice to be in this really safe place where people are like speaking to the whole of who we are, our religious background, our faith identity, but then also our sexual identity as well.
and the
And
group you spoke to is from a Christian or Adventist background, or all?
from Christian/Adventist, everyone. So from all
Right.
different
Wow.
denominations.
And
So I got to.
are they getting a bit coordinated, did you say? They're gonna be running
Oh,
more
nice.
conferences and whatnot?
So they have it every year here in New Zealand, either in Auckland or Wellington. And so last year they had it at a church called St. Peter's, and I was one of the keynote speakers there.
Wow.
And then it
Can you
was in a
say
really,
who they are?
yeah, they're called Diverse Church New
Oh,
Zealand.
that's
So
the name of it. Right,
yeah,
right.
Diverse
Diverse
Church.
Church.
And they have a conference that's every year, and they've got a Facebook group and everything else.
Wow.
So, last year, I remember when I preached there, was an Anglican church, so very much high church, really beautiful pews and stained
Yeah.
glass windows, etc. But the style in which I preach is very lively and contemporary and very.
Yeah.
Anyway, afterward, the vicar said, "My gosh, I don't think we've ever seen anyone use the stage in the way that Andre did. Because they normally are up on the high platform, and
Yeah.
like they do at big camp. I was using like the stage, and
Yes.
you guys just never
Oh.
heard so much laughing in the church. So
Oh,
anyway, I
I
think,
love it.
yeah, it was so cool. It was like coming home, to be honest. And it was like,
Yeah.
and I was saying like, man, we can be ourselves in this place. We don't have to like worry
Wow.
about people thinking that we don't belong.
Imagine if each of those people could go back to their churches, be accepted, share their gifts. How
Oh,
on fire would Christianity be?
absolutely.
What a
Yeah.
loss to the Adventist church
Oh,
that you aren't on stage each week sharing this passion.
oh.
I
Well,
just believe, like,
like, and I'm only one person, but there's so many. I just think of so many,
yeah,
wonderful friends, like Joe and Arden and so many others in our
yeah,
church that, have got so many amazing gifts,
yeah, yeah.
and that the church could really benefit from,
I
and who the
know.
local churches would benefit from. And also just people visiting the church for the first time are looking for a place to belong.
Yeah,
Representation
yeah,
really matters. Like I think when people see people that look like them and have had the same experiences as them, it's we all deserve that, I think.
Imagine the Adventist Church at its very top levels allowing women into the top leadership position. I'm meaning GC president, the very top levels. At the moment, they can't because of ordination and gender. Imagine if gay people, rainbow community, were allowed the top leadership positions, that people were given the job because of their merit, because they're good at it. Imagine how that would radically change the power and the nature of the whole movement. It would just be vibrant, exciting, inviting, inclusive.
Totally. And then also the appeal of that to people who are struggling equally in life and, who are going through stuff, but
they benefit from it. Yeah.
That's right. And who would just see that as like, representing them and people that have got the same struggles as them, but needing, that anchor, that's God and the church,
Yeah, boy. Sadly, it may never be. Hey, I don't like to bring things back to a negative point every time. We just had this great high of of what could be. And that diverse church sounds amazing. Was your keynote talk online at all? Is it available on YouTube at all?
No, it's not, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I do have a talk that I did at Pepsi Church a couple of years ago.
Oh, really?
That I'm looking after this. That was a sort of an example of, the type of preaching.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
maybe you can share that in the link. Later on too.
Yeah.
Hey, I've really enjoyed our conversation today, and I wondered if you could leave us with some final words of advice for those who are potentially struggling, who are this moment we talk about, that it's really hard to come out. It's really hard to be your true self. A, what advice would you give them? Would you encourage them to move forward? And B, where can they go to? We've mentioned a lot kinship. Are there other places you can think of? Diverse church. What resources and places can you point people to?
Yeah. My friend Anthony Van Brown, look him up. So I think they're called Ambassador and Build Bridges Association. So they're in Australia. Got lots of really good resources there. Also the other places, Matthew Vines or the Reformation Project. Lots of really good resources there. Of course, Alicia's book that's going to come out later. Some really good podcasts that Chokotama and Dan have as well. Some really good, lots of stuff online if you just do a good Google search there. So look them up. I've got lots of interviews online as well. So there's lots of resources there, and there's lots of different voices now. I know when I was looking back in the day, the only testimonies I would ever see were from so-called ex-gays. That was the only thing there. Right. And now there's more informed voices, not just that. In fact, that voice is becoming is being diminished simply because people just know that it doesn't work anymore, so that's a smaller voice now, thank goodness.
Okay.
My encouragement really would be to any young person is that, hey, Jesus loves you, God loves you, just there's nothing that compares to being yourself, to accept your full self, your sexual orientation or your gender identity, and also your faith as well. And your faith is much bigger than just the church, or even those around you. Get around some really supportive people. Make sure that when you're seeking advice from people who have actually been there and done it, not people that just have a theory or that think they know. And don't live in fear, just live in love and have people around you that are really supportive of you. I'm really blessed. I've got an amazing partner who also grew up in a Christian denomination as well and went through conversion practices as well. And people would think, oh my gosh, they're not Christians, but we pray all the time together. We always remind each other that to be led by the Spirit. When we get fearful or when we get stressed out with work or life, and we always remember, no, you got to be led by God's Spirit. And I think it makes a difference. He's been through what I've been through. Was an ex-alcoholic as well, and just got a lot of similar life experiences together. And having that type of relationship, having my family love me and accept me for who I am, having a partner that loves God and accepts all of who I am, including my religious sort of identity and faith, just feels awesome. And I will just encourage anyone, particularly as we go into this new year in 2022, don't delay. On the other side, this is what faith is about: stepping out and just allowing God to fully use you, and allowing yourself to move through the world, without fear, without worry, without judgment. God's got your back, and the people that love you the most do as well. The people that don't know you are the ones that are going to be most critical of you, and just don't pay them any attention. I always say they're not going to be there. Do they help you pay your bills? No.
Yeah.
Are they going to be there in your deathbed? No. Do you enjoy even being in their company? No. So who cares? Know who loves you, and that's enough. And then just thank God every day. I think the important thing for those people who have survived conversion practices is positive self-affirmations. I think we need to do this as Christians as well, because I think religion teaches us to really beat ourselves up, to be really hard on ourselves. And so we need to speak to ourselves in the most positive way every day. Remind yourself what a blessing you are, and all the great things that God has done for you, and who you are, just intrinsically who you are. I think culturally, as Australians and New Zealanders, we think that we're talking ourselves up, but I always go, there's so much negativity out there, and there's so much terrible talk, that you need to do that for yourself. You need to minister to yourself. So thanks, Peter, for this opportunity. Really appreciate it. Really, really glad we can talk, and thanks for what you're doing in terms of promoting and making available voices like mine and others. And just want to give a shout out as well, just to my family, in particular my cousin Mons, who's in Australia, and who I just learned so much from, because when he came into the church, it was never an option for him to be closeted, and I would look at him annoyed because he wouldn't play the game. And now I just fully respect him, and I just I wish that I had that brave, been as brave as him, But ironically, it happened because he grew up in a non-religious family, in my view, So he just learned to accept himself. So I think we've got to unlearn a lot of stuff in religion as well.
Yeah. Andre, you're an inspiration. It's been so good getting to know you better and chatting with you today. People have really appreciated it. Those that are watching on Facebook, hit those love hearts as a big sign of thanks. And I think Mons may have even just written a nice comment. Did you say it hasn't come up just as Facebook user, but I think that's that's him. And so those that are watching, lots of love hearts are going up here on the Facebook monitor. And just want to encourage people to subscribe to our YouTube channel, press like even on the Facebook comments. Facebook and YouTube reward us with the algorithms, the more subscribers and whatnot. Click that like button. And so, yes, SDAQ&A is back, and we will be continuing on next week, Thursday or Friday, 11:30 Sydney time, or both days. See how we go. Once again, thank you very much, Andre, for being with us today, and we look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Peter. Okay.